All right, people. We are a little late for shooting the breeze with Sean MacMillen. We were having some technical difficulties trying to get him online. I just sent him another invite. We're going to see if he can get on. And if so, we're going to have a great conversation with U.S. Army veteran Sean MacMillen. Hopefully, this will work this time. I just sent him the email. I just sent him another one. But not sure if everything's working right. This is something new for everyone. This is on Podbean and also it's on YouTube. So maybe I'm not even sure if he can go on YouTube and do it, but hopefully he can. Hopefully he can get on this podcast and able to call in because I'm really excited to speak to him. He's a U.S. Army veteran who served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Bosnia, and then came home and battled some of his own fights back here. And I really want to speak to him so he can tell everyone how he did it, how he got through it, how he's still getting through it, and how he's now helping people do the same thing that he was doing. So hopefully he can get on here and we can have this conversation. Unfortunately, my partner, Rich, was not able to come on today because he had a doctor's appointment. So I'm a little discombobulated right now. I'm trying to get YouTube up and running also, but it doesn't seem to be working for me either. Don't have a picture. Always love going on. This looks like it's not going to be a good day for any of us because now the camera's not working either on the YouTube settings. You see, Sean is on with us right now, but he cannot hit the call-in button. Allow call-in. Here we go. I just sent you an invite, Sean. There we go. You are connected.
Now can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
That took a little bit.
Yeah. This time it gave me the option to allow access to my microphone. So,
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Sorry about the everything that was happening there, but we finally got it going.
technology works great until it doesn't.
Well, you know when it works great? When you're younger.
Yeah.
I feel like the old folks now. I got to get my son down here to help me get my stuff working. It's never good. But hey, we're on. We're running. Unfortunately, I can't get the YouTube up and running right now. So right now we're just going to be on the Podbean. Hopefully, I
That's
can
right.
get this up and running, and so you can watch it on Podbean also. I mean on YouTube also.
That's all right. I have a face for radio, so this works fine.
That's 2 of us right there. I've said that multiple times on here. So I'm fine with just doing the Podbean. But I want to thank you for coming on. Uh,
Thank you for having me.
Spoke to you a little bit ago about getting you on here to talk about your story. And that's pretty much what it is. I don't call these interviews, we call them conversations because it's less of us asking you questions and you just answering. We kind of want to hear everyone we've had on so far has just talked about their life, what it is, and then we'll chime in here and there with questions we have. But it's pretty much you have a life story that will hit true to a lot of people and hopefully can help some people also after listening to this conversation.
Exactly.
So I know we met a long time ago. You were how do I say, you taught me how to bartend at TJ's. When was that? 95?
That would yeah, I was thinking about that on my run today. I want to say the last time we saw each other would have been 95, 96 when we were working at TJ's because I graduated from LHU in 96. So Yeah, it's been a while since we've seen each other.
Yeah, it's been a long while. And that was pretty much the only, like, we knew of each other, but that was really the only time you and I, like, spoke and talked and hung out was behind the bar at TJ's.
Yep. Yep.
Now, if correct me if I'm wrong, were you a Ben graduate?
Yeah, that's that was the weird thing about Ben and Lock Haven. You had high schools that were what 10 minutes apart, but yet the whether you went to one or the other, unless you were related, you basically didn't know anybody from the other high school, and it was like two so totally different countries.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was almost like it's weird because nowadays all of us get along.
Yep.
But back in the day, you didn't really talk to the what we call the bennies. I have no idea what you called us. Actually, I don't even know if I want to know what you called us.
I don't think we had a name for you guys.
The better guys, is that what you just said? Sorry, you came in a little.
Yeah, a little garbled.
Yeah. But but I do have to thank you because if it wasn't for your instruction, I would not have had the best job.
That was a good gig in college, wasn't it?
So you are a direct relation, like you know, the 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon. You are
Yeah.
that for Josh and Shannon.
Well, I'm glad I could help out.
So so I knew the Sean prior to you going into the military. And
Yeah.
even back then, for the little I knew you, you were not the loud, obnoxious, look at me type of guy. You were the more serious with the dry sense of humor. Is that a correct description of you back in the day?
Yeah, I think more you know, I was never, I guess I never was loud, obnoxious, one of those in your face. You know, now it comes across as more being humble and having humility. I think back then it was just a more of probably lack of self confidence and low self esteem and trying to figure out where I fit in the world and where I belonged, and that's why I pretty much was just quiet and kept to myself.
So you went to college and then you went directly into the army. Was it kind of an ROTC program you did in at LHU that then put you right in as an officer in the army?
Yeah, my original Army experience started probably actually it started Mother's Day 1992 when I went to Fort Benning for basic training to be an infantry guy. I was in the Pennsylvania National Guard for 2 years.
I lost.
But I had to get out of the guard because then at LHU, I ended up with a 2 year, or yeah, I ended up with a 2 year Army ROTC scholarship. So I did ROTC at Lock Haven, and then I actually went on active duty into the Army 2 days after I graduated from
Oh,
college.
so you didn't have much of a life after college. You went directly from college right into the military.
Correct. Yes.
So where did you go right out of college?
Actually, yeah, weird story. Originally, I ended up at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, as a medical service officer. So, it was quite a shock for me going from, the greater Lock Haven area to San Antonio, Texas. And, for me, the officer basic course was basically an extension of college. It was, we are just overgrown college kids with bigger paychecks to enjoy ourselves.
So then how long were you stateside before you saw any active? Well, here, can you explain this to me? Because I'm not huge on the military vernacular. But
Yeah.
you can be in the military, but is there a difference between like active members, non-active, those that are overseas? Are they different than active members? What's so when you were down? in Texas. What were you considered active at that time?
Yeah, I was active duty at that time, but the three main branches, at least in the Army, are you know your active duty, the National Guard, which is a state run, and then there's the Army Reserve, and then overseas, at least overseas tours are considered outside the continental United States. Like Alaska was an overseas tour for me. Hawaii is considered overseas. Korea, Germany, Italy are all considered overseas tours. So for me, my career, so for me while I was at Fort Sam Houston, that was all schoolhouse environment, learning how to be an Army officer, learning how to be a medical service officer. And then my first duty station was actually Fort Drum, New York. So that was pretty nice because I had been married and was only 4.5 hours away from home. Fort Drum is not the New York that most people think of. You might as well. It's about 70 miles north of Syracuse. It's pretty much Canada. Actually, I think half of my TV stations were Canada. That's when I learned about curling too. Um, but So I spent 4 years at Fort Drum, and during that time, I did a branch transfer and went from being a medical service corps officer over to an infantry officer. So during that time, I was just I did a I went to Rangers. I went back down to Fort Benning for Ranger School. Graduated from Ranger School, and then became a rifle platoon leader, and then moved over to be an anti-tank platoon leader. And I want to say I was in for about I was probably in for 2.5 years before my first deployment to Bosnia. Actually, I had one almost deployment to made it to Bahrain one time when Saddam was acting up. My son was 7 days old when I deployed, but my first deployment was to Bosnia. Yeah, I was in about 3 years. So my first deployment was Bosnia. That would have been uh, the back half of 1999.
All right. So when you say because you said you were in New York for 4 years, so you were deployed while you were in New York, while you were still doing the medical, and then you came back and went down and did the Rangers.
No, I never. My deployment to Bosnia was after I went to Ranger School.
Okay.
So that was when I was a anti-tank platoon leader. That was our first deployment. My first deployment to Bosnia.
All right.
So
So now, question for you: when did you get married? Because you said you only had 2 days after you graduated till you went away.
oh, actually, yeah, I actually
That must have been a busy 2 days.
no, actually, I flew home from because we had already had the wedding date set. I didn't expect to go in the army that quickly, so I went down to Texas for 2 weeks, and then came home and got married, and then went back. And my wife stayed up here because I was in school, so I was basically living in like a dorm environment. So it was yeah, it all went down pretty weird.
Now, when you went up to New York, did your wife go with you?
Yes, yes,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
So then when you were deployed, I take it she stayed stateside. Now, was she in New York? Was she in Texas? Or did she go back home?
She was in New York, but she kind of went back and forth between New York and Pennsylvania a lot because it was close, and we were living in housing up there, so we still had responsibilities of having to take care of a house up in New York. So, but she went back and forth quite frequently.
Right. It wasn't that bad of a trip. Like you said, that's pretty much just what was it, about 3.5 hours north of you?
About 4.5,
Was it?
unless winter and it was lake effect snow season, then it would turn into a 10 or 12 hour trip.
Yeah, no, I know that. And what most people don't know is, like you said, I live in New York. I live an hour north of the city, and it's a lot less like New York City, Long Island, and
Mm,
more like Pennsylvania. It's mountains, it's trees, it's rural areas, so
yeah.
same type of thing. So then, all right. So you were in Bosnia. You came back. You come back into New York.
Yes, I came back to New York, and about that time, my time at Fort Drum was up, and we packed up and moved to Fort Benning, and then I went to the infantry captain's career course. So I was back in a schoolhouse environment with uh, learning how to basically be learning how to be a company commander, learning more tactics on a bigger scale and planning on a bigger scale and more leadership skills. So that was, I think that was about, I want to say 8 months of schooling.
All right. Now, where's Fort? Where's that at? Where's that located?
Actually, I think they just changed the name of it, but now it's I think Fort Moore. But it is Fort Benning is in Columbus, Georgia, about an hour and a half south of Atlanta.
Oh, all right. Now, again, I don't want to keep just asking, but did your wife follow you everywhere you went?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now you're down in Georgia.
Hmm.
About what year is this? Because you were 96, you came out, you got in, deployed,
2000.
came back.
I was in Georgia for a majority of 2000. So for 11 months I was in Georgia before I moved
Okay.
again.
And then where'd you say you moved to?
So from Georgia, because the Army has a sense of humor with this hot place thing, um, which was my dream duty station. But we moved to Fort Richardson, Alaska,
Whoa.
just just outside of Anchorage.
All righty. So yeah. So you went from up by Syracuse down to Georgia, up to Alaska. How
Mhm.
long were you in Alaska? Because I've always wanted to visit there, but I don't know if I could live there.
Oh, I loved it up there. So I was up there for exactly 2 years, but well, back then they've changed a little bit, but back then it was first of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. Then it was the only airborne battalion up in Alaska. So we were attached to Elmendorf Air Force Base, which is also in the Anchorage area. So I did some staff time. Then I spent almost 18 months as an airborne company commander.
Up in Alaska.
Yes.
All right. All right. So you're in places for like 18 months to like 2 years most of the time when you're when they do they just relocate you when you get a new job or do they do it every so often?
It depends. Like Fort Drum, I was there for almost 3 years. Typically, as a lieutenant, you're somewhere for about 4 years, and schools can, be a year long. Alaska was 2 years, mostly because at that time it was, there's no, because as there's a difference between captains of non branch qualified. Then after you do a company command, you're considered branch qualified. And the way jobs are slotted in the Army for captains is either non-branch qualified or branch qualified. And at that time, there were no branch qualified jobs in Alaska. So after 2 years, it was time to move again.
Okay. And again, this is something you have a son, correct? At this time, now a young child, and your
Yeah.
wife.
Yes.
So
So Tom.
it had to be hard on them going from place to place, as well as you.
Oh yeah, it was. I think it was probably harder on them. Well, it was hard for me too. But it was hard for them because I'm the one who signed up for this. They
Right.
didn't they didn't necessarily sign up for it. They would go somewhere and make friends and get settled in, and then poof, it's time to go again. And I don't care how many times you move or the fact that somebody moved you, it was stressful every time.
Yeah, well, they say one of the three biggest stressors are selling your house, well, moving, a new job, and Christ, I forget the last one. I'm trying to sound smart, but they can't even think of it, or like a marriage or something. But yeah, moving and a new job, and that's pretty much what you did every time you went somewhere new in the military, correct?
The job changed every time.
Yeah.
Every time. So for me, I knew that the jobs would change, but it was always like, especially company command. Leaving Alaska was very hard for me because I had just spent 18 months leading these guys. Probably spent more time with them than my own family. Slept with them, ate with them, and what was hard, 9/11 happened right before I gave up command. Um,
So
and
you were in Alaska for 9/11.
yeah, I was in Alaska on 9/11, which, with the time difference, we didn't, our phone rang at like 4 a.m. I think it was Heather's mom called and said, "You guys need to turn on your TV." Because we weren't that day. I remember it distinctly. We were not supposed to. We didn't have to be in until later in the afternoon because we were supposed to jump that night. And but our phone rang and said, "Turn on the TV." And as soon as I saw it, I just got up and got dressed and went to work. And it was amazing that day. Is everybody got dressed and went to work without even having to be called. It was just life changing experience. I know you're closer to New York City. It was a life changing experience for thousands and thousands of people that and it obviously changed the trajectory of a lot of people in the army and families and stuff with deployments that started afterwards. But for me, it was hard because I had just commanded these guys for 18 months, and I basically had to watch somebody else step in and take them to combat. And I took that personally that, hey, that was my job. Those are my men. I should be the one doing it. And it was hard to watch them go to go to Afghanistan with somebody else.
I could imagine. I could imagine. But when you started talking about 9/11 and getting a phone call, I can remember I was on Long Island at that time at the gym and running on the treadmill, which you'll get into with your running. But after the first one hit, I went to the gym just thinking it was an accident. And then I saw the second one. And I just got off the treadmill. Like most of the people in the gym, everyone stood there in silence watching the TV. And then the majority of the people just left and went home. You, on the other hand, because you were military, you left your home and went to work.
Yep. That because of the line of work you came into, I think it takes a special kind of person. Most people instincts say run away from the fire, run away from the bullets, but for some of us, it's maybe it's the way we're bred or the line of work we go into. We're trained differently, and we'll go headlong into it.
Yeah, without asking, without question, you just when they're shooting, and that's what. Well, me being the firearms instructor, you teach them. You go towards the shooting, which
Mm-hmm.
most people are going away from, and even some police and some, I have to say, probably some military, it takes something for them to do that. But with me, it was just there was no question. If you hear it, you go.
Yep. Exactly. Instinct is to go in. Our instinct is to go into it because that's the way we trained. We go into it and we move towards it and neutralize it.
So after 9/11, you were in. How long was it until you got deployed?
Probably 4 years, 3 or 4 years.
All right.
Um, After 9/11, again, the Army has a sense of humor. So this time we packed up and we moved to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is about an hour and a half south of Shreveport. There's like 3 hours to Houston, 4 hours to New Orleans. Um, so I went to a job there, helping units train to go to. First, it was just Afghanistan, but then that transitioned to Afghanistan and Iraq.
Okay.
So so we were training units to go to Iraq and Afghanistan, and then I want to say it was April. Actually, it was. I got to Afghanistan. I got attached to Ranger Regiment for a short deployment, and As a matter of fact, it was 2 days after Pat Tillman got killed in Afghanistan is when I got to Afghanistan.
All right. Yep, I remember that. Guy left the NFL to go to the military.
Yep.
So then, so you got to figure you were, that's after 2001, 4 years. So 2005, you're almost in 9 years at this point, correct? By the time you were over there?
Yes.
All right. So then how long were you over there?
For that one, that was just a short trip. I was only there for 2 months. I think, I spent some time at Bagram Airfield, which is basically a city implanted in the middle of Afghanistan. It used to be one of the old Soviet air bases from their original invasion. Then I spent almost a month out on the border of Pakistan.
All right. And then back home, I take it you were that's
Yeah,
the thing. It's like you go from Alaska down stateside, and then 4 years later shipped over, and then what'd you say, a couple months there, and then you come back.
so I was only there for 2 months that time, and then I came back and went back to training units to go to Iraq and Afghanistan. And about the when I came back from Afghanistan, that's the drinking. I grew up in an environment, at least in the army and the infantry world and airborne ranger world, paratrooper world of work hard, play hard. So there was always drinking involved, and it was just part of the culture. And after I came back from Afghanistan, that time the drinking kind of started to pick up. Really wasn't a problem yet that I'm aware of. I think later on that year it became a problem, but really that year it wasn't. But I was coming up on the end of my time to at Fort Polk, so I thought I had put in for another command. I was actually got selected to go take command of a company at the Sixth Ranger Training Battalion at Eglin Air Force Base, Camp Rudder, down on the Florida coast for the swamp phase of Ranger School. But they needed me there in 2 weeks, and we were trying to figure out how to make it work because my wife was teaching kindergarten at the time, and um, you know, and my son was in kindergarten, I believe, at that time. So it was just trying to figure out the logistics of it when another opportunity landed uh, in front of me. 10th Mountain Division, which is actually the division up at Fort Drum, was standing up a new unit down at Fort Polk, and I got the opportunity. I was still a captain to move into a major slot at the new brigade standing up. So instead of trying to pick up and move to Florida, I knew that with this new unit that I would stay put for at least another 3 years, which, spending 5 years in one post was like a foreign concept to me at this point. Um, we weren't supposed to deploy right away because it was going to be a new unit. And I was like, all right, get a little time to get settled in. Um, and things were changing rapidly. So I moved over there. I think like the summer of 2005 or late 2005, I moved over to the new unit, and uh, then we were playing you're not deploying, you're deploying, you're not deploying game. And then they just started hand picking people to deploy. And, I showed up to work today and it was like, hey, Sean, pack your bags, you're leaving for Afghanistan tomorrow. And I was like, okay. So off I went to Afghanistan for trip number 2. Um, and, of course, wreaks havoc with a family life when you come home and say, by the way, I'm packing, I'm leaving. And that's what happened. So I ended up going to Afghanistan and working a couple different jobs as um, combined Joint Task Force 76, which they were the big hierarchy, the top dogs of U.S. forces at that time in Afghanistan. So I worked as a maneuver plan. Um, so I worked as a maneuver planner, then I worked as a battle major, and then I worked as a night battle major, and also did. I spent a little bit of time going back and forth to Pakistan. Excuse me, to Pakistan, working on um, some different trilateral training exercises, putting U.S. military, Pak military, and Afghan military into different training exercises. So that was trip number two. You know, so I bounced around different places from Bagram, Kandahar, and a couple little fire bases out there that time. And then I do remember I came home for R&R because I remember we went to Disney and the beach. I do remember that. Um, then I went back to Afghanistan, and that's when I got promoted to major in Afghanistan. Uh, and then I was told, "Oh, now you're going home because you're switching jobs." So I went back to Fort Polk to take over as an operations officer of one of the other infantry battalion or one of the infantry battalions in our brigade. And so when I got back, the drinking escalated a little bit more. Uh, Actually, a lot more. The drinking escalated a lot. Um, it was it was becoming a problem. If I wasn't working, I was drinking, and then that turned into I was drinking and working. I was hiding it, lying about it. Uh, just I honestly felt more comfortable back in Afghanistan than I did stateside. I was trained to do that. Felt at home there, but I was just I was a logistician. I was a logistician. I knew exactly if I stopped here and got beer, how many beers I could drink by the time I'm home. And I stopped at the same car wash and ditched the beer cans in there. Lied about it every time. You were drinking. No, I wasn't. How many did you drink? Oh, just two. It got to the point where I had to have it to sleep. I was, hiding bottles everywhere, then forgetting where I hid them. I would hide one under my pillow so that if I woke up shaken, I could drink. I was, drink
Wow.
drinking at work, putting it in my coffee. It just it really escalated. But when I deployed, I never drank. Um, that was
That's what I was gonna ask you if you were drinking while you were deployed, or if there was even accessibility to it while you were deployed.
There was accessibility. I mean, for us, it was general order number one was no alcohol. But when you're working with multiple different countries, you know, we worked with the Brits, the Aussies, the French, the Dutch, the Germans. There were so many other countries that they don't necessarily follow the same rules as we do. That if you wanted it, you could get it. But it was just I took my job seriously when I was deployed, and that there was already enough danger. I didn't need to be making decisions or anything else while I was liquored up.
Now, before you were deployed over there for the second one, were you drinking a lot before you went, or did you drink more when you got back from that second deployment?
Every time I deployed, that's when my drinking escalated a little bit more.
Okay.
Um, so even after the first one, it was picking up, and it was noticeable. Then after my second one, it was really noticeable. Um, then so I think this what saved my bacon there was exactly 90 days after I came back from Afghanistan the second time. I was in Afghanistan for my third time. So I was home
Now,
for
how I was going to say, how long in between those is it?
it's supposed to be a year. You're supposed to have a year in between deployments. So at that time, it was called dwell time. It was supposed to be for every day you're deployed, you're supposed to be back home. But
Okay.
I switched to a different unit. I was the operations officer. Boom, I was back in Afghanistan. Hell, I ran into the same people that I was with before. They're like, "Hey, Mac, we thought you went home." I
Oh,
did.
wow.
I came back, and we were down. We were in Ghazni province, is where we got stationed. So we had two little fobs and a lot of fire bases out there. We were spread out, and you know, looking back on a lot of responsibility fell on me because each battalion or each task force, as we fought over there, has three field grade officers. I was one of the three, but I was the only one with any deployment experience, and a lot of the responsibilities fell on me because I had the experience, but yet I was just in the big scheme of things. I was a baby major. I didn't have some of the
Right.
experience these guys did, and that deployment was pretty rough with people we had lost. We lost people on Thanksgiving. Um, we lost a couple guys a couple days later, and then winter set in. So not a whole lot happens in Afghanistan in the winter. The weather gets pretty gnarly.
So, so what year is this when you say the winter? Now you're back for your third deployment.
So
Is
that
it
would have been so I got there in November 2006. I came back. Deployment number two ended in August 2006, but November 2006, I was right back in Afghanistan again.
okay? So
So
like you said, you didn't even get that full year off, which when you think back, that was probably a good thing because you said every time you came back, your drinking got worse, but when you went back, you stopped. So it was kind of a
yeah,
break.
yeah, it was a break. I think it was probably just looking back, it was just prolonging the inevitable. Um, because over the winter, not a whole lot happened. I remember Christmas Eve that year, we got 36 inches of snow. Um, and you can imagine the Afghanis don't exactly have snow removal equipment.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Could only imagine. Kind of like when you go down south, what their snow removal is, but
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
worse.
yeah, yeah. Donkey carts don't really remove a whole lot of snow.
True.
Um, but February, I think it was February 2. So fast forward a little bit, it was like February 16th, 2007, got the call. I remember going to sleep that night. Um, Went to sleep and I got woken up. They're like, hey, sir, we need you. I was like, okay. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. I walked out and oh, there was 6 inches of snow on the ground. I'm like, when did it snow? And I remember looking out at the airfield and I'm like, when did the helicopter come in? And they're like, that's what we need to talk to you about. Um, there was actually helicopters, MH-47s, big like Chinooks that were transporting people from Kandahar. Actually, I think they were out of the Ranger Battalion. I forget which battalion, the Ranger Regiment. They were transporting guys from Kandahar to Bagram to take them home, and one of their helicopters went down. And They wanted, even though it wasn't our area of operations, we had to go down there to do the search and rescue on it, and that was pretty rough. Um,
I can only imagine.
then it became more personal as you found out that one of the guys who was killed in the helicopter crash was the son of a friend of ours from back at Fort Polk, and that was that that whole thing haunted me for years. Um, but then out of the blue, we got, hey, you guys are going home. So March 2008, I found out the real reason we were going home is because they were bringing us back so that we could go to Iraq in 8 months or 18 months. And I was just like, uh, you know, and like a lot of us, when I got back, we always had a post deployment health survey. Are you struggling with this? Are you struggling with that? Did you see this? Did you see that? And I lied every time. No, I didn't see dead people. No, this isn't bothering me. No, I never got shot at. No, 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 because I was more concerned with, I want to go on leave. I want to go have 2 weeks off with my family. I don't want to be spending it with the shrink or the social worker or anybody else. So the standard answer was no, I'm not having any problems. But in reality, I didn't. I was probably aware that all this was taking a toll on my mental health, um, but I didn't want to accept it because I I was brought up to be very independent, very self sufficient, to be a warrior, to solve problems on my own. To be one of those masculine men.
Sean, Sean,
Yeah,
can you hear me?
yeah.
Hold on real quick. I don't know if you're near a speaker or something, but we're starting to get feedback, and you're kind of cutting out. I don't know if you're moving around, but
No,
you're kind of
I'm not moving.
kind of cutting out on me. You
I,
there now?
yeah, I'm here. I haven't even moved. So,
All right, I hear you better now. Sorry. Go ahead. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I couldn't really hear you. So go ahead. Sorry.
but I was just, going back, just raised to be very independent, very self sufficient, to be a warrior, to solve problems on my own, to not have problems. Especially as a combat arms leader, I didn't want to be seen as weak. That I was an airborne ranger qualified. I shouldn't be having problems like this. Uh, I grew up, pretty much taught to be a masculine person. The stereotypical masculine of, we don't talk about problems, we don't talk about feelings. If you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about.
Yep.
And if you were hurt or injured, rub some dirt on it and get back out there. If there's blood, we cover it with electrical tape or duct tape, and you keep going. There's no time to say you have problems. So I just kept stuffing, stuffing, stuffing. Really, that stuffing turned into drowning, 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 because then it just was drinking more and more and more, and to the point where nobody wanted to be around me. I was, everybody was noticing. Marriage was falling apart. I was hiding booze all over the place, lying to everybody,
So
sneaking.
so I was gonna say, at this point, you were still, you in your own mind, you were still hiding it. No one knew, or you were kind of like, you knew everyone knew.
Really, at that time, the only people who could really tell were my wife and son, and maybe our neighbors. The people closest to me could tell, but other people, there was just one other person at work that noticed because he went through something very similar. Um, but for the most part, nobody noticed, other than my family, and that's I was really having problems there. I had moved out at one point, and hell, I would start fights just so I could stay at a hotel a quarter of a mile away from my house, just so I could go drink. Um, Whatever I could, if you were on my side, that was the hard part too. Is alcohol was such a part of the culture that when you're around other people that are drinking like you, it's hard to tell that you have a problem.
Right.
Um, and so I was always around other people who drank like me, but then so if you were on my side and you were drinking like me, we got along great. I love you guys. But you start questioning my drinking, I would just lash out in anger to keep you away from me. Don't threaten my way of life. It- you
Right.
know and
Now, now, were you like it's I'm trying to grasp, like, because being a bartender, you can see different types of alcoholics. Some come in and have 12 drinks over the night and go home, and then some just get annihilated every night and pass out the bar. Were you, I hate to say it like this, I'm not degrading you, but were you like a professional drunk that because you were saying that people didn't know. So it had to have been like you drank, but you drank enough that you weren't like falling down, or you know what I'm saying? Is that how it was, or were you one that would pass out when you got right back into bed?
it depends on what stage of my drinking career I was at, because at that point I would say I was a high functioning alcoholic because
Okay.
I was still working. I could still. I would get up. I would drink on my way to PT, and I would run and do everything else, and drink the rest of the day, and never once stumble, fall, anything. But I was still doing everything I needed to do. But I was drinking a fifth a day. My tolerance was that high that
Right.
and
But
I had to drink to keep the withdrawals away too.
all right, so you were already experiencing that if you weren't drinking, you had symptoms from not drinking.
Yeah, because that was the hard part for me. It took me a while to figure out. At some point, there was a line drawn in the sand because I can remember my wife telling me, "You're only allowed to have two tonight," and I would be pissed. What do you mean two beers? That's like done in 5 minutes. So I'd always find a way to get more than two. But at some point, there was, I won't drink. I won't drink during the week, or I won't drink um, before 5 o'clock, or I won't drink. I had all these sets of rules, but at some point, I started waking up and drinking earlier and earlier, or I would wake up and drink, or I would wake up in the middle of the night and drink, or I was drinking at work. There all of a sudden it was like I stepped over this line that said, "Okay, we're going to break every rule and we're just going to drink all the freaking time."
Right. Now, was it different drinks depending on where you were? Because I know you can't just have a beer while you're working. Did you have something else to kind of help curb?
I had moved on from beer. Beer bloated me, and I had to pee too much. And like you said, it was too hard to hide. But boy, pour some vodka in a Diet Pepsi bottle, and everybody thinks you're drinking Diet Pepsi all day. That was golden. So it had switched over to, and liquor was quicker. It did the job quicker, and I didn't have to pee as much. So it was easier to hide vodka than it was sitting there with a case of Yingling on my desk.
Right. And they also say that vodka doesn't give off the odor like if you're drinking whiskey or other types of liquor. Is that true?
I don't know. Other people later on, I think just because I was doing a little bit of everything, other people could smell it coming out of my pores. But when I was drinking vodka all the time, not as many people noticed it. And I think I went with vodka because it was cheaper than buying whiskey. So
True. So now, what you are where at this point in your life? You've already been deployed 3 times. Uh, Before you got deployed a second time, I think you said you're in Florida doing the training. Are you still in
No,
Florida? Where are you at this
I
time?
I turned that job down. I never went to Florida. I stayed at Fort Polk. We bought a house down
Okay.
there because I knew we were going to be there for 3 more years. So I came back from Louisiana, and that's when, or came back to Louisiana after my third deployment. And that's when everything just, me mentally falling apart, drinking all the time was falling apart. Um, my wife, it was actually June, it was about this time in 2008. Um, my wife had it with me. She had actually come back up to Pennsylvania with my son, and I was
And
supposed to.
how
I was.
old was he at this time, Sean?
It would have been 10, exactly
Okay.
10. He was born in '98, um, and life for him was hell growing up with me because I was either drunk, deployed, or somewhere in between. You know, it was pretty rough on him. Became very learned as he got older, became very protective of his mother, and was just tired of it because, in reality, looking at my life from the outside, we had it all together. We had the nice house, we had the 2 cars in the garage, we had the 2 dogs and the cat. We didn't have the white picket fence. We had chain link, but on the outside, our family looked great, but on the inside, it was just chaos. Between my drinking and arguing and just you know angry all the time, intense. Again, I felt more comfortable in Afghanistan. I'd rather go back, and I didn't know how to deal with everything that was going on inside of me, whether the depression, the anxiety, um, the survivor's guilt, the guilt over what I deemed being responsible for deaths over there, or just the nightmares that of seeing the carnage and wreckage of war, and it just I didn't know how to deal with it, and I wasn't
And
going to tell.
I was just going to say, and unfortunately, the generation before us, and then our generation, the men aren't supposed to talk about their feelings. It's weird how that's kind of why we started this for people to realize you can have feelings and talk about it. And like you said earlier, every time you push it down, it festers into something, and yours turned into alcohol. So you now your wife moved back. You're still down in Louisiana, I take it, and you're like you said, your picture perfect house. You did what you're supposed to do. You have a family, you have a house, 2 car garage. In your own mind, it's like I got this, but like you said, on the inside, it was chaos. What happened after they moved back up?
I was supposed to go to Fort Hood, Texas, for a training exercise with the rest of the staff. And when I was driving there, got I got drunk and rolled my truck. Um, and I spent a night in jail. That was my first night in jail. Got up the next day, bailed out and rented a car and went back to my house in Louisiana. And it was at that time, I didn't tell anybody what was going on. Um, I distinctly remember I packed up all of my everything that belonged to me got packed up because I didn't want to live, and I didn't want anybody to have to deal with my stuff or pack it up. So I packed up all my stuff and put it into one room, and I remember my suicide note at that time was a note to my father and my battalion commander saying, I don't remember exactly what I said, and I didn't want to make a mess in the house, so I went out and I sat on my porch swing with a rifle in my mouth, and I just wanted the pain to end. I wanted it all to end. And what saved me that time was I looked inside, I saw the dogs. I was like, shit, there's nobody here to take care of the dogs. So I went back inside and I thought, well, I got to find a slower way to do this to give people time to get here. So I ended up, I ate, I don't even remember everything I drank, but I ate an entire bottle of Tylenol because I knew that would fry my liver and I would be done.
Right.
So I woke up the next day disappointed that I was still alive, and I decided to go check myself into a mental health place. But by that time, my liver was already starting to shut down, so I got moved to a hospital in New Orleans. And by that time, family had started figuring out what was going on. Parents flew down to, my wife and son flew back down to Louisiana. But liver was shutting down. I was on dialysis. And because of my drinking history, they were not going to give me a liver. They refused to
Right.
give me a liver transplant because they're like, dude, you're just going to destroy this one. You've already, look what you did. You're freaking not stable. And so I was like bright yellow, total jaundice. And I think I was there. I don't remember how long I was there, but I had finally convinced them after a while to give me a liver. So I was about 24 hours away from a liver transplant when everything turned around. Somehow somebody was looking out for me, but everything turned around. But I was still on dialysis for a little while. So I think I spent 6 weeks in the hospital down there. And of course,
Now, all the while you're still active military.
yes.
Okay.
So, but the reality is that wouldn't last much longer because, wrecking my truck, I got relieved from my job. I got moved to another job, but I got relieved from my job. But I got back, and I remember being told, if you drink again, you'll die. And I think I lasted a couple weeks, maybe a month, and thought, well, let me try this again. It'll be different this time. And I started again. Um,
Now, before you started again, while you were in the hospital, did you get through the withdrawals?
yeah, I was through,
You were
to
you were pretty much done with that. Like you didn't start drinking again because you were having withdrawals. You just tried it again.
no, I was just, I think the weird thing that, I think somebody only with an addiction issue or a substance use disorder would understand that obsession in your mind that says, yeah, we'll do this. Despite every negative consequence, we have really good forgetters of every negative consequence that, hey, I've just basically destroyed my family. I just wrecked a truck. I lost my job, damn near killed myself. Hey, let's have another one. It seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Um, and, off to the races I went again. Uh, just wreaking havoc and picked
Now,
up.
did your family stay down with you after you got out of the hospital, or did your wife and parents go back to PA?
My parents came back to PA. My wife and son stayed down here because I stayed out of trouble and I didn't drink for a while. So that was kind of my MO of when people would get on me about my drinking, I would back off and kind of try to do the right thing for a little while, just long enough to get everybody to trust me. then I'd be back at it again. Um,
Right.
but at one point, I had actually moved out. I got an apartment, uh, and I think mostly it was just. I think it was just so I could drink the way I wanted to drink. Um, but the drinking was becoming more and more of a problem. I was going to counseling for the drinking, but nobody ever mentioned, the depression, the anxiety, the PTSD. Nobody ever mentioned any of that. I was just, I just had a drinking problem.
Now,
Um,
was this counseling through the military, or you went on your own?
that was still in the military.
Okay.
We had tried. Well, I was so adamant about not using military counselors. I don't know, 2000 in between deployments, my wife and I went to marital counseling, but we went to a outside place because I didn't want anybody in the military knowing that I was in counseling. Um,
Right.
so find somewhere that nobody's going to see us, and I won't go in a uniform. So that's how much it was hide all this stuff from everybody. So, um, but eventually, it just the drinking caused so many problems, and I moved back home. But I had decided that I wanted to get out of the army, and I dropped my paperwork to get out of the army. I was going to go work for defense contractors. I got approved, got hired by a place. Um, I forget which one. It was like Dynacor or somewhere like that, making 6 digits a year. And I was going to go back to Afghanistan. I felt comfortable there. What better place to go for a guy with PTSD than send him back into a combat environment? But, the allure of money, I was more concerned about, hey, I'll have a boatload of money.
Right.
Um, so, um, but somehow my paperwork was getting jammed up. But then somehow the army learned that I was having all these problems with alcohol, and so I had been relieved from my job. I had received a general officer memorandum of reprimand. I remember, so I had to turn down a Dynacor job because the army was dragging their feet on getting rid of me. And all of a sudden, I get a letter that says, "You have 15 days to get out of the army." I was like, okay.
What? So you were trying to get out, and then they drug their feet, and now they're forcing you out.
Pretty much so, yeah, because of my history. Because I had already been to treatment. I went out to Point Loma sub base in San Diego for a 28 day inpatient alcohol treatment. I was a rock star there because I'm pretty intelligent. So you teach me as long as I can learn all the buzzwords, and I can talk like I'm a person in recovery and going to do my best. I walked out of there looking like the valedictorian. 2 days later, I was passed out in my house drunk again.
Wow.
Um,
So how long were you in that?
I was out in San Diego for 28 days.
All
Um,
right.
so
And no drinking the whole time you were there. 28 days, you were good.
no, because it was breathalyzers and whiz tests all the time because it was inpatient substance use treatment. And pretty much couldn't go anywhere anyways. Um, so I knew I was getting out of the army, and fortunately, I got a job with another contractor teaching ROTC at Kutztown University, Penn State Berks, excuse me, and Lehigh University. And knew we were coming back to Pennsylvania, so I used all my leave up to come home. My wife and son moved back to Mill Hall, and I looked, and we bought a house out near Reading. Um, but we were trying to sort out schools for Thomas. So I was basically what I call a geographic bachelor. So I was living in Reading by myself and still struggling with mental health. I mean, I was doing, I was driving to work at like 90 miles an hour. Everything that was sat along the road I thought was going to blow me up. So I was drinking all the time, 24/7. Uh, I drink a couple beers in the morning on my way to run PT. I would be able to run college kids into the ground, and I would drink a couple more beers on the way home, drink a couple shower beers, and then I'd switch to liquor the rest of the day, and that's how it was going. And everybody around me knew that something, or at least my family knew that something was up. Knew I wasn't in the best of shape because I wasn't answering my phone, I wasn't going home.
I was
Just
gonna say, so you didn't go home on the weekends,
usually no. She came out there, and usually she would come out and help me work on the house. But it was the weekends were when I was just when everybody was around me. Those were the worst because that's when the withdrawals would kick in. I would shake like a leaf. My anxiety would go through the roof. I wouldn't sleep. Be having nightmares. Yeah, Christmas Eve 2008. I didn't realize just how alcohol withdrawal could affect you. And then I later on learned that it can be deadly if you don't medically detox, which I got a few of those under my belt. Too many to count. But that Christmas Eve, I remember standing there, everybody doing Christmas activities. And next thing I knew, I woke up on the floor and I was like, what happened? And they're like, you had a seizure. I
oh
was
wow,
like, oh. And I didn't know it was from the alcohol withdrawal. So I ended up going to the hospital and they fixed me up. But that's what it was like. Every time I couldn't drink, I would be in withdrawal. And it was just like, wow. So, yeah, then my life really, I was just, I didn't, I, I just resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die an alcoholic, that I didn't want to live, and I ended up um, I think 4 or 5 month span. Ended up with 5 DUIs.
wow,
Um, Blood alcohol for one of them was 0.41. One of them, I remember, I was a 0.285, and the cop said, other than some of the things that stood out, he'd have never known I was drinking because of how steady I was, even at a 0.285. So I ended up getting all these DUIs, and it took a long time for the legal system to catch up. Um, didn't catch up to me.
because you got them so quickly,
Yeah, I mean, the first one, some of them were like one Friday, then the next Friday.
right?
And, but it took so long for everything to catch up that I think the first one was in October, and it took or maybe it was September, uh, but it took until January for it to all catch up. And I remember when the constable showed up to take me in, and I was a man. I was, my poor parents. I remember calling my dad for bail money, and he said no, and I unleashed on him. I just unleashed, and I later learned that they refused to bail me out because they knew at least if I was in jail, I was safe and I wasn't drinking.
100%. As soon as you said that, I knew what your dad was doing.
Yes,
Now, what year was this, Sean?
that would
Still
have
oh
been
08 or
January 5th, 2009.
all right?
So the court system, I had cleaned out what retirement I had from the military and all my bank accounts to pay for attorney, so that I had a good one. And somehow they were going back and forth in Berks County. So in total, I ended up spending 11 months in the Berks County prison. Because they were going back and forth. Do we put them in treatment court out there? Do we not? And somehow, I was able to connect with the VA at that time. And, the judge actually let me out of jail long enough to go to the VA in Lebanon. And that's when I got my first diagnosis of PTSD, and I got service connected for PTSD and substance dependence or alcohol dependence. But so I spent all this time there, but somehow there was this loophole that they found in the laws. So all my DUIs ended up being first offenses, um,
Okay.
which didn't help. I still lost my license for 10 years. But when it came time for, so somehow they worked out once the stuff came back from the VA. I still remember the judge. He says, I'm cutting you loose out of jail. He said, you don't belong here. You belong at the VA where you can get help. And that was part of my sentencing. Is I then went to the Coatesville VA outside Philadelphia and spent a couple weeks, about 3 weeks in the substance abuse treatment unit. I came home for Christmas, and then at the beginning of 2010, I went and spent 3 months in the inpatient PTSD unit.
Now, Sean, at any time were you wanting to get better? I hate to ask that, but was your mind starting to change, or were you still
I,
not thinking you had a problem?
I knew I had a problem, but I knew I had a problem, but the issue was I was still wanting to do it my way, my ego and
Okay.
pride, and that manly, I'm going to do it on my own.
I don't need help.
I don't need help. That was still very much there. That I was intelligent. I was this badass. That I can do this on my own. I've done all this other stuff on my own. I'm not getting my tail whipped by a liquid substance. So, you know, and that was kind of it. What I, as far as the alcohol, but the 3 months at the inpatient PTSD unit were very helpful. And I came back and I started school at LHU. One of those people puts, or God puts people in our lives, but I came back as a health science major. It just so happens that my advisor at that time, assigned advisor, was Dr. Dave Bauer, who is a person in recovery who actually, he's retired now, but he shares his story openly. But he killed somebody like 35 years ago in a DUI accident. But he became my sponsor. And later on, when I struggled, because I then stayed, I won't say sober, but I stayed dry for 2 years. Uh,
Okay. Back with your wife and child?
yes, we were back here, but I had asked for a divorce. Things just weren't going well, and I had asked for a divorce, and there was a lot of resentment. And understandably, she stood by me through a lot. And then now, after all this, I asked for a divorce, so that got ugly. And the uglier it
Right.
got, so that got ugly, and when it got ugly, that gave me an excuse to drink again.
All right.
So that's what I did, and that just made the whole divorce and custody even more nasty. And I accept my responsibility for that, but I still, you know, but I was still doing well in school. And I remember Dr. Bauer said, unless you got to do something different, because he said your problem is you're too damn smart. And it never occurred to me that intelligent people don't necessarily do well in recovery at the beginning until they surrender. So I want to say, 2011 is kind of, I went off the rails for a short period of time. September 2011, went off the rails for a little bit and went out to the Pittsburgh VA for a 10-day stay and detox and treatment. And then I stayed dry again until May 2012. I had done some therapy through the VA at the vet center in Williamsport. Things were starting to look up. but I still wasn't working any type of program of recovery. I was still just doing Sean's program of recovery, which was just grin and bear it, white knuckle it.
Were
And
you were you also getting treatment for the PTSD at this time? Is that what the VA was doing for you, or were they doing both the PTSD and alcohol?
they were doing PTSD and alcohol, but the fact that half the time I went in there, I was still drinking, so that was always getting in the way, and I was always lying about how much I was drinking. My standard answer was, it's just like two. Yeah, it
Right.
was like 2 bottles a day. But
I don't mean to laugh, but it's funny how you say, "Yeah, I was still drinking." That kind of got in the way of my sobriety. Like going in for help, it kind of got in the way.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, May 2012, and it still seems like I'm trying to explain it to some people. Some people get it. It was like this out of body experience of I was walking by. It's since moved, but the old wine and spirit store in Lock Haven, and decided I'm going to go back in here and try it again. Of course, I told everybody I wasn't drinking. Um, we were actually there was a bunch of us that were going out to the Poconos to do the Tough Mudder, and I was 6 sheets to the wind on the way out, and I was still pretty much yeah, I was still pretty much hammered doing the whole Tough Mudder, and still trying to tell everybody I wasn't drinking, but I was, and I kind of continued drinking for a little bit. But then I took summer classes. That date was ironic that we're here on May 31st, because May 30th, 2012, I was taking a small group communication class at LHU, and I was in this group with two obviously very younger people than me at this point. I felt like Billy Madison when I went back to college. And but she said, "Hey, we're gonna draw topics out of a hat, and these are just random topics that you guys are gonna present on." All right, yeah, whatever. And usually by 8 a.m. class, I was already half in the bag, and the topic pulled out of the hat for our group was, should alcohol be illegal? And I
Okay.
remember, and the professor looked at me because she's like, "Sean, why are you packing up? Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to treatment." And by 10 o'clock that night, I was sitting in Bowling Green Treatment Center outside Kennett Square, out towards Philly, in treatment. And I went through treatment again, and uh, and actually stayed. That was by that time. That time I listened. They said, when you get out of here, go to an AA meeting, stick your grubby little mitt in the air, say, "Hey, my name's Sean. I'm an alcoholic. Just got a treatment, and I need a sponsor," which I actually did this time.
Now, was this the first time that you decided on your own without anything happening to go to treatment?
Oh yeah, because the first time it was because the army said I had to go to
Right.
treatment. Yeah, the first time. Yeah, the first time was because the army said I had to go. Second time was because court said I had to go. um, it was always somebody else's idea of why I needed to go, but this was the first time that I said I needed to go, and I came out. I got a sponsor, worked the program of recovery, learned just how powerful, being to me, I learned that being vulnerable and sharing what's going on with me is one of the strongest forms of courage. I always thought it was the bravery and the stuff, because you put me on in a firefight or jump out of an airplane or something like that, I can be the calmest guy in the world, but don't ask me to tell you how I'm feeling.
Right.
Don't ask me anything emotional. Um, I'll take all the physical pain you can dish out, but we're not going to do the emotional pain stuff. Um, but that's when I discovered that opening up to other men and other people in recovery and getting rid of this stuff was just how powerful it was. And these are other strong men who, a lot of them were vets or Vietnam vets. And just to be able to go in and, or hear other guys say, "Yeah, me too."
Now, how long did it take you in those meetings to open up? I know you probably went in and listened to other people doing it and watching it because, like you said, you grew up where you shoved everything down. How long did it take you to
Well,
release a little?
I you know, I think it happened immediately because I had been through enough therapy, but part of that was imposed by my sponsor, who just told me to sit there and shut the hell up for the first 30 days, to just listen because I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, okay, you're right, because obviously I didn't know what I was doing. So and started working a program of recovery, and life started to turn around. Finished school, uh, went on to grad school. Life was pretty good, and I stayed sober for seven and a half years. And I want to say it was, for me, the decline, I didn't pick up again until the summer of 2019, but my decline happened sometime. The best I can pinpoint is right after 2018. Life was pretty good. I was running a lot, but right like November 2008, actually Veterans Day 2018. I ran on a treadmill for 24 hours to raise money. The half of it went to the Heron Project, and half of it went to the Lycoming County Veteran Treatment Court. So I did that on Veterans Day. Raised about $5,000. My dad came and played the bagpipes, but after that, it took me a while to figure out that my mental health was declining very subtly. The depression was coming back, the anxiety was coming back, nightmares were starting to come back.
Did you find did something happen that started this, or
I'm not really sure. I can't pinpoint exactly what happened, or I don't know if it was, at that time I was working as a mental health therapist, if that was just starting to wear it down. But, everything I still tried to do everything I was doing. I was getting up at 4 a.m. I was still going to run. I was still working. I was doing everything and trying to double down on everything that had worked before, except one thing. I wasn't going to more meetings.
all right?
I was able to convince myself that, because I was working helping people, that I didn't need to go to as many meetings, and I started to kind of coast away from meetings. I was still going to a bare minimum, but I really wasn't working a program. I tell people I was around AA. I wasn't in it,
Okay.
and but it's weird that when I came back from Afghanistan, I drank to stay numb, to not feel. But then I got to this point where I was numb, and I drank. I felt, and off to the races I went again. So,
So that was 2018.
no, what that 2019 is when it all unraveled.
Okay.
Like August 2019 is when it really kind of unraveled. Um, and there were a lot of things going on. I ended up getting a DUI and was suicidal again. So I ended up going to another psych hospital, and came back and thought I was on the right track, but I ended up just continuing the drinking, and I actually ended up checking myself back into treatment again. This time I went to Karen, down near Wernersville. Great program, and came out of there. I lost my job. Um, Things were just kind of all over the map. Mental health wise, I was still all over the map, but I was, working on trying to get back to the inpatient PTSD unit at Coatesville, trying to cut through all the red tape of that. And I ended up, drinking again. And alcohol took me some pretty dark places along with all the PTSD. Decided I didn't, and had another suicide attempt, and that was February 22nd, 2020. I was pissed off again that I'd lived. But I spent some time in the psych unit at Geisinger, but they finally, again, I got to thank my father again, who fought and fought and fought, um, along with the local VA rep here to get me to Coatesville. Um, and uh, and that was, 10 years later, I was back in the same exact room I was in the first time I was there. And
Wow.
one of the guys I had served with was there. So I was back there, things were looking up, but that's, if you remember, that's about the same time COVID was kicking in.
Yep. Yep.
So a lot of services were shutting down. They were starting to combine units, and I was actually thinking about coming home early. Because it was just like I wasn't. It was the point where this isn't beneficial. You've taken all the services that matter to me, and I think it was the 19th of March. It was I don't remember the specific day, but I remember getting a text from my father that said, "You need to call me as soon as you can." And I called my dad right after our morning meeting, and he said, Thomas is missing. Because
Which
at
is your
that
son?
Thomas was my son. He had gone on from high school, went to flight school, and at 21 years old, had a job flying Lear jets out of Washington, PA. And he hadn't showed up for work, and nobody could get a hold of him, which, at least me knowing my son, if he's like any other 21-year-old, their phone's always glued to their hand. And nobody could get a hold of him, and he was missed. And right away, my stomach sunk. I knew something wasn't right. That's not like him. So if there's one place to be when you find out your son's missing, it's surrounded by about 10 therapists and a bunch of damn good veterans who care. One of them actually knew Thomas from Alaska. So I came home and couldn't, everybody was looking all over the place, looking high and low. The company he worked for actually had a helicopter up looking for him. um, we looked at all his usual spots and, a couple of false sightings of his truck here and there. But March 22nd, 8:46, got the phone call that he had shot himself and he had been found by hikers. So that was devastating because part of worst fear is losing a child or something like that, and kind of blame myself. Maybe he learned this kind of coping skill from me because he was just like me. Hey, how you doing? I'm fine. No, you're not. I'm fine. And that was like, I think every male in my family, that's the answer is I'm fine. And that's why I thought I'm fine is the biggest BS answer there ever was. And because it was COVID, we also couldn't have a service for him. So that just kind of prolonged the agony. So that was pretty tough. Fortunately, the recovery community was there for me. A lot of online Zoom meetings. So,
Sean, are you there for a sec, bud?
yeah.
I hate to do this to you, but something happened. I lost everything while you were talking. Hold on one sec. My son's here. Were you listening, Matt? All right. We lost Wi-Fi. I don't know if anyone heard you. I hate to do this to you, but it was right when you said your dad called and said your son was missing. You said he was flying out of Washington to Lears. Can you
Uh-huh.
start back there? But I apologize. I was trying to
Oh,
text you to get a hold of you.
I didn't answer my text messages.
All right. No, what you were talking. I totally apologize. Something happened. I lost everything here. And if you could just, again, the last thing I heard was that your son was flying Lear jets.
Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, my son had his dream job flying Lear jets, And but so my dad called. He was missing because he didn't show up for work. Um, my dad came and got me. I came home and we looked everywhere. Everybody that knew him was looking for him. A bunch of people say, "Hey, we saw him," but didn't necessarily. It wasn't him or it wasn't his truck. Um, so we looked all over. Then March 22nd, 2020, 8:46 p.m., I got the phone call that the hikers found him. He had shot himself. Um,
Jesus. Now, were you still away, or were you
yeah,
home at this time?
I had been home for 3 days, I think, when that came, because I came home as soon as I found out that he was missing. So I was home. So first phone calls were, my parents and my brother, and then my sponsor. Went and visited my parents that night, and it was pretty rough because then add in COVID, couldn't have a service for them either. Just pretty devastating. Um, you know, I wasn't angry. I would kind of blame myself that maybe he learned this kind of behavior from me, or this is how he coped because that's how I was trying to solve my problems. And he was like every other male in our
Right.
family that, I'm fine, I'm fine is the biggest BS answer. And I know that now. But I relied on a lot of people. I still had a therapist working that I was working remotely with out of Coatesville. And I also had a therapist that I was working with remotely out of Williamsport. So I had two therapists in a recovery community and amazing set of family and friends who were there for me. Um,
But
then,
you were also, the difference though is you were reaching out to them also now
oh
compared to
yeah,
before.
yeah,
You,
definitely.
you were able to say that you needed help and looked for help, and that's one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah, I was taking all the help that I could get at that point because I knew how powerful it was. I knew how helpful it was. I knew that, to me, I guess it takes a stronger person to reach out for help or to say how I'm feeling than it does to just sit on it and stew. You know, but to me, it takes a strong person to reach out because, the three hardest words I ever had to say in my life are "I need help." But they're
Right.
also but they're also the three words that I'm the most grateful I have ever learned how to say. Um, no doubt about that. Um, so about a month later, yep, the next month, sentencing came up for my DUI. So I ended up in the, in the Lycoming County. I ended up in as a participant of the Lycoming County Veterans Treatment Court, the same one that I helped raise money for 2 years earlier. Wasn't expecting, but I'm grateful it was there. A lot of great resources. Judge Butts, who's very experienced in treatment court, is she's just amazing. Uh, you know, and so I ended up on house arrest for a year, which that was just my goal was to stay out of jail. So I ended up on house arrest for a year. So the dog and we both had to stay in the yard, and I didn't get shocked. She did, but I just had to stay in the yard for a year. But the reality is what I learned then is that year, which arguably could be the crappiest year of my life, turned into be one of the better years of my life, just in terms of healing and personal growth, of healing from stuff in Afghanistan, healing from the loss of my son, pouring myself 100% into recovery because everything was Zoom, and I just had the time and I was undistracted for the most part to be able to just focus on. me, which is something I never really did, and do it in a genuine and authentic way of just, hey, this is stuff, I gotta get it done. And
Right. Which
I've been.
when did you go to court for that? Was it the end of 2020? Because I was going to say, being stuck at home by yourself with just a dog could have gone the other way also, but you
Well,
used it in a good way.
yeah, well, 420. So ironically, was the day I got sentenced. So 420 to 420 21.
All right.
Yeah. So, for me, I told Judge Butts this, being on house arrest wasn't a punishment. It was pretty much a reward not to be out in the crazy world that was
All
going
right.
on. you know, and, so it gave me the time to do what I needed to do and focus on what I needed to. And still, people came by and visited and stuff like that. And, I had my allotted time that Dad and I went grocery shopping. Um, and I remember when my probation officer came by because I had bought a treadmill, but I didn't really want to run inside. And I'm like, so do you think I can maybe run outside once in a while? And he goes, what are you thinking, like once a week? And I said, like 7 days a week. And he goes, what are you thinking, like 30 minutes at a pop? And I went, like 2 to 3 hours at a pop. And then he goes, oh, you're the crazy guy that ran for 24 hours on the treadmill,
Yeah.
aren't you? I said, yep. So I was able to get back into running. As long as I kept doing the next right thing, the court system gave me a little more leniency and allowed me to do things that help with my sobriety and my recovery and my healing and just my overall wellness. So I'm grateful for that. I didn't look at Veterans Court as a punishment. I looked at it as an opportunity,
All
and
right.
I took advantage of every opportunity and every resource of counseling, recovery meetings, and everything. And so I got off the ankle monitor, and I think that's about the time I started actually being employed by Heron Project. And life over the last 3 years has been pretty good. I ended up being 100% service connected veteran. So, um, you know, I've done, so I get my VA disability. I work for Heron Project part time, helping alumni and other people with substance use disorders. I have 12 people that I'm, working with as a running coach. Have a little side hustle doing some custom woodworking for people. My relationships are better than, they ever could have been. I just, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wouldn't have been everything that I went through is what got me here and made me the person I am today, to realize that I can have feelings and be a badass at the same time. Um,
Right.
you know, I can, there's been a lot of wonderful people along the way that in running and recovery have helped me in the greatest way. Cause I know one of the questions, it just hit me, that you sent me, I'll go back to 2019 when things kind of fell apart. And I get asked this question a lot: is running your new addiction?
That's
Uh,
it. I was just gonna ask you that because I remember I followed you on Facebook. I see all your pictures of running. I tried to do it. I just don't know how you do it. And like just I was gonna say about your dog too, about the pictures of you and your dog. So yeah. So is running what you used instead of, I hate to say it like this, but alcohol, or is it just have you always enjoyed running?
I hated running, and I was, uh, you know,
Do you still hate running?
no, I love it now. The funny thing is, I wasn't the most athletic kid growing up. I was still pretty good at sports because I was thinking of, like, even, I was thinking, man, you had Joey Caruso on there, and I can remember playing against him in All Stars, and I went on to, do what I did, and seeing what he's doing in baseball now, that's just probably his dedication to it. And I was just like, wow, it's pretty cool to see, kid. I remember playing against all stars and 11, 12 years old, seeing stuff like that, him doing things like that. But in 2019, part of I had signed up for then was it's called the PA Triple Crown. It's the Heiner 50K, the World's End 100K, and the Eastern States 100 miler. I had signed up for those three races, and that is when I would say running became an addiction for me. Because I became obsessed with it. I was working with a coach, and I was bound and determined that there would be no red marks on my training schedule, that everything had to be green no matter what, no matter how I was feeling, that if it took time away from my family or anything else, too bad. I was just going to go run. And I think that is what I used in place of recovery meetings. Is that was the demise, and I recognize that. But the reality is, no, I didn't always like running. The reality, I had to run in the Army, had to.
Right.
But the Army can take the fun out of everything. It was just because you always had to do what somebody else, this large group. But it wasn't until I weighed 240 pounds that I got into running and kind of caught the trail running bug here in central PA. And originally it became the reason was for fitness, and it turned into more of a social thing for me. But now I can recognize I still love running, and I love running through the woods and just being at peace and the wellness part of it. But I used to look at it before as something I have to do. Now for me, it's something I get to do. That I
Okay.
don't obsess over it. That I don't. If I get up and I don't feel like running, I don't. Or if I don't have time during the day to do it because of other priorities, then I don't do it. But now I don't obsess over it. It's just another tool. It's not, I don't run to stay sober, as one of my coworkers, Pam Rickard, says. Before, people thought that I ran to stay sober, but now I get to run because I am sober. And it's just one of those benefits of all the amazing people. And it's just something that I enjoy. Not every run feels great, but for the most part, I
I was gonna
enjoy
say
it.
those 100 milers cannot feel great. That's just something I have another friend that does it, Karina Kruk. Well, that was her maiden name, but she does the 100 milers. That's an endurance thing. How do you even train for something like that?
Well, I'll get back to Karina Gates, who
Gates, there you go.
I will see her this weekend because we are both running the Newport 10 miler up in Newport, Rhode Island.
All right. Well, tell her I said hello.
I will. But yeah, Karina and I have run together. But part of it is trusting the process and putting in the time. And I have a good friend of mine. I don't think it's his quote, Charlie Engel. He wrote a book, Running Man. He's in recovery. He actually ran across the Sahara. There's a documentary out there about him. That after a while, running is 90% mental. The other 10% is in your head.
That's true.
And after a while, you just kind of learn to keep going, accept that it's going to hurt, then it's going to feel better, then it's going to hurt, and it's going to feel better. And yeah, there's that. Know how to react, know what those low spots. To me, running is very much a metaphor for life. That, hey, it's going to feel good, and then it's not. You're going to trip and fall. You get back up, and sometimes you need help from other people. You got to nourish yourself. Food and water and good sleep and recovery and all those things. But running, it's going to in life, it's going to throw things at you, twists and turns, and you have to learn how to problem solve. And that's all those miles put on your feet. You run into things and you learn how to problem solve that way. on when you do it in a race, you're like, oh, you can tap back into that. Say, oh, I remember when
Uh,
this happened before. This is what I got to do.
So what's funny is you're saying about all that. I remember when I was running and I would message you about what do you do about the bloody nipples or what kind what kind of underwear do you wear because you just can't wear boxers when you're running distances.
No, a lot of those are hard lessons learned that pain is a hell of an educator, man.
Yes, it is, and I hate to say it, but I have felt pain, but chapped nipples hurt.
Uh huh. Yeah.
Oh, good Lord.
Chafing is
But
one of the worst feelings in the world. You never know how bad it is until you get in the shower.
yes, exactly. You're 100% correct. But Sean, I got to thank you because we're getting down close to the 2 hours. But I want to thank you for coming on. But I want to give you the time right now to tell people how they can get a hold of you and about like the Heron Project or the running or the personal training to let people know how they can get a hold of you or if they need help or anything, how they can reach out to you.
You can find, first, thank you all for listening, and thanks, Josh, for having me on here. It's a pleasure. But I've run with the Heron Project since 2016. I work for them now, but they're a nonprofit that helps people navigate treatment, also provides treatment scholarships, recovery coaching scholarships, sober living scholarships. We also do prevention work, founded by Chris Herron, former NBA player who lost his career to addiction, who now gives back in an amazing way. But you can get a hold of me, Sean, SEAN, at heronproject.org. You can check out heronproject.org for all the resources there. If you or somebody else is struggling, because we also have family support groups led by licensed clinicians. If you're looking at Josh's Facebook page or in his Facebook group, you can track me down, Sean MacMillen. There on Instagram, it's sober Sean MacMillen, sober underscore Sean underscore MacMillen. But always willing to help out, whether it has to do with running, personal training, or just life stuff, or recovery stuff, or if you have somebody who's struggling. If I don't know the answer or have a resource, I will find it for you. But it's recovery has been beautiful to me, and I'm grateful that I get to be here and share my experience, strength with, and hope with others. That maybe somebody who needs help will reach out. If I can make an impact on one person, then it's been a good day.
100%. And again, that's the Heron is HERREN, correct? Heron Project. So if they're looking that up.
Yes.
All right. Well, Sean, I'm glad you were with us. I'm glad you're doing well. Keep doing it, but quit showing off and posting all them 100 milers on Facebook when I can't even get out and walk right. But I
It's
just got
got
to share. I got to share the quote I sent with you in case other people are listening. Uh, Kind of fits today. Sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but actually you've been planted. And I think that's all about your mindset. And unfortunately, sometimes you don't have it, but you got to try to get that mindset. It's not always buried. You were planted. So, Sean, again, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate the conversation. Like it went 2 hours, and again, it was great conversation. But I appreciate it, and hopefully next time up in the Lock Haven area, we can get together.
Oh yeah, definitely, brother. If I'll be in New York City for the New York City Marathon. I'll come check out your Zen garden.
Oh, there you go. We can sit out there. Well, you can run, and I'll sit out there while you run.
All right, brother.
All right, man. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
All right, I'll talk.
All
All
right,
right,
catch.
everyone. Thank you for listening. And we'll be coming up again next week. We have another conversation. This one's going to be with Jim Harshaw. All right. He's the guy that says lead success through failure. So thank you for listening and later.